How's it going, Connor? Remember I didn't do the backflip before? I'm gonna do it now, so don't be scared. Okay. Okay, we're just gonna raise the energy in the room for 1 second. Okay, nice to meet you guys. My name is Cliff Weitzman. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Speechify. And as Mr. Green said, I'm super dyslexic. Like really, really dyslexic. So when I was in first, second, third, fourth grade, I couldn't learn how to read. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't figure it out. And I'm going to tell you a little about that in a second. But my goal for my talk today is, number one, to kind of share with you guys my experience growing up with dyslexia, what going to school was like, and what I did to cope with dyslexia. The second thing I'm going to do is tell you guys about Speechify. So when I was in college, I built about 36 different products. I won the startup competitions at Harvard, Stanford, MIT. I started off by building like this attachable brake for longboards and skateboards that I 3D printed and patented. Then I built a biotech supplement and a payments company and a bunch more apps and websites. And I decided to focus on one thing. And that one thing is this app that I created. And what it lets you do is, it's an iPhone app, a Mac app, an Android app, a Chrome extension, and it lets you take pictures of your physical books, and then it turns it into an audiobook for you. And it uses artificial intelligence to create such a high-quality audiobook that you can't tell the difference between a real human speaking and Speechify speaking to you. And so now Speechify is used by hundreds of thousands of people all around the world. And every single week, people use Speechify to read more than 100 million words. So the equivalent of Harry Potter times like 1,500. And the last thing that I'm going to do is kind of summarize for you what I learned through that experience and kind of what you can do as an adult with dyslexia, but also just as an adult entrepreneur. Okay. Oh yeah, and Speechify is 100% free. So you should all download it when you get back home. So for me, as someone with dyslexia, reading one sentence takes as much energy and brain power as it takes most people to do a 4-digit long division equation in their head. And when I was in first, second, third, fourth grade, as I said before, I couldn't learn how to read. Reading circles were the worst. We'd all sit in a circle, and my palms would start to sweat, and I'd kind of calculate the time when it would get closer to me, and I timed it just right. And at the right moment, I'd go hide in the bathroom. I did this every time. People must have thought I had a bladder problem, better than them thinking I'm stupid. And for me, the hardest thing was that it was difficult to imagine myself being the person that I wanted to be. You see, when I was little, I wanted to be president, a billionaire, and a pop star. And to be two of those things, you need to be able to read. So I decided that I was going to learn how to do it. I would walk around with a book under my arm, and I would daydream that one day I would be able to read. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't. And so my parents, they got this gigantic puzzle that had all the alphabet on it, and it was kind of like a carpet. So I would sit with my dad, and we'd look at the A. And the A would be A, O, E, O, U. B, ba, bo, bi, bo, boo. And I couldn't even make those sounds. It just didn't click in my head. And eventually my parents started to get frustrated around this. And my dad is my hero. Even more than being president, more than being billionaire, The thing I wanted most when I was older was to be like my dad. Everybody loved him, I loved him, but he thought that I was lazy. And my teachers thought that I was slow. And so what I ended up starting to do is I faked reading. What I would do is I would sit in class or on some armchair somewhere, and I'd have a book open in front of me, and I'd run my fingers under the words, and I'd pretend to read. And this worked for about 2 years. Nobody noticed that I was fake reading. And I would memorize the chapter, and then I would fake read in front of people. On the faraway island of Solomon's soil, your little turtle was king of the pond. A nice little pond, it was clean, it was sweet. The water was warm, there was plenty to eat. But then my parents found out. And they were really disappointed that I was lying to them, and they canceled my 9th birthday party, which is the worst thing that can happen to you as a 9-year-old. And so I decided again, okay, I'm going to figure out how to read. And so every day I would go to the public library and I would practice reading. But every day I would fall asleep in the book because it takes me so much energy to read. If you think about it, if it's like that math equation, a paragraph is 10 math equations, but at the end of a paragraph you're exhausted. By the end of a chapter, you've fallen asleep long ago. So after the 30th time a librarian woke me up, I decided, okay, I'm not going to keep going with this. This is not worth it. But my dad didn't give up on me. He never gave up on me, ever. And the book that I wanted to read the most was Harry Potter. And I never got past the 10th page of that book. So even though I'm the eldest of 5 kids and my dad worked really late, he made a special exception. And he would come home early, and he would sit with me on my bed, and in a slow, deep voice, he would read Harry Potter to me. And I loved it so much that he started recording himself reading Harry Potter. And when he couldn't make it home in time, I would walk around listening to a cassette tape of a recording of him saying the story for Harry Potter. And this was in Hebrew, because I grew up in Israel. And we moved to the United States when I was 13. And so we got to the United States, and one of the first things that happened is my dad found an audiobook of Harry Potter in English. And he told me, Cliff, if I get you this audiobook, will you listen to it? And I said, yes. He's like, but it's English and you don't speak English. Are you sure? I was like, yes. He said, okay. So he got me the first audiobook for Harry Potter. And that book is how I learned English. I listened to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone 22 times in a row. To this day, I've had the first chapter memorized. You don't believe me? Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director from Code Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had about twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son too, called Dudley, and in their opinion there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted. And then I listened to the next one, and the next one. And I listened to all the Harry Potters over and over and over again. And that's really how I learned to speak. And then I listened to Narnia, and Percy Jackson, and Game of Thrones, and Lord of the Rings, and Atlas Shrugged. And then I listened to the Bible a couple of times, just for kicks. And I started finishing about 2 books a week, 100 books a year. And I've been going at that pace for the past 12 years. So I went from someone who hated reading and hated books to someone who hated reading but loved books. And today, other than my parents, nothing has taught me more than the stuff I've learned in books. But I still needed to do school. And sadly, there aren't audiobooks for most textbooks that you have in school, for most Wikipedia articles or newspapers you want to read. Even Facebook doesn't have an audiobook or text messages that I get. And so I really struggled. And when I started high school, we had a summer reading book assigned to us that I was really excited about, called Marley and Me. But I couldn't read it. So though I was a freshman in high school, I sat with my mom in her bed, and she read Marley and Me to me. And in high school, every day I went to this period called academic workshop, which is for kids who need help. It's like a special ed class. And there was one person there that changed my life. His name is Mark. He was a teacher's assistant. And every single essay that I wrote in high school, Mark helped me on. Basically, I would write the essay, and then we would sit together, and he'd sit behind me, and I clicked on the little red squiggle. And I didn't know which was the right option to choose, because when you're dyslexic, it's really difficult to spell. And so Mark would go, that one, and I'd click that one, and he'd go, that one, and I'd click that one. And that's how I wrote every essay in high school. But that's also how I started to learn how to spell well. At the same time, I was in every single AP and honors class that my school offered. And the reason for that was I was learning so much independently when listening to books. And most of the books that I listened to had nothing to do with school. It was just stuff that I was interested in. And then time to apply for college came. And so I applied to 26 different schools. And one of the schools I ended up applying to was Brown, just across the street from here. And I went to high school in California, so I flew all the way out here and I visited Brown. And Brown to me is like heaven on earth. The first 3 weeks of Brown, my cheeks started to hurt for smiling so much. And then I just got used to it. And I got into so many interesting conversations with people about economics and how Napoleon took over Europe and how to increase ATP in the brain to have more energy to think, and so many different discussions. So I loved it. And the summer before Brown also had a reading book called Sons of Providence that also didn't have an audiobook. So I spent all that summer trying to read that book as an 18-year-old about to start at school at this Ivy League school. And I couldn't finish the book. And so my mom took pity on me again. And now as an 18-year-old, I was sitting with my mom, and she was reading my summer reading book for me for college. So you must think, wow, you must have been really nervous to go to school. I was like, yeah, I was. Because how was I supposed to keep up now I didn't have my mom? But here's the thing, my mom had to work and she didn't have time to finish reading Sons of Providence to me. So I still had about a quarter of the book left before the flight to Brown. So I did the only thing I could. I hacked the Kindle and developed this text-to-speech software that allowed the Kindle to read the book onto my iPhone, and then I listened to that on the plane. And it worked great. And then the next assignment, and then in that first meeting, it turns out that nobody else had read the book. I was the only one. But this was amazing, because now I'd solved my dyslexia problem. Like, I could use text-to-speech for everything. So the first class I took at Brown, we needed to read this physical book that had no audiobook, no problem. I built this little iPhone app, and it let me take pictures of the book, and they would compile it into this audiobook, and then I'd listen to that. And then we needed to read a PDF for another class. So I built a Mac app that let me import the PDF, and it would read the PDF, and then, boom, I could listen to it. And then I built a thing that allowed me to read websites and Wikipedia pages and stuff like that. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had wings. The first time I felt that way was when I finally discovered audiobooks. But when I was little and I was 10 years old and I wanted to understand why planes were flying in the sky, and my dad didn't know how to explain that to me, I Googled it, and I went to Wikipedia, and I saw an amazing article that had the answer, but I could not read that article. And now I could, because I built a little piece of software that let me do that. And so the other thing that I didn't start to talk about in the beginning is, when you're an adult, you can be a lot of different things. You could be a teacher, you could be a lawyer, you could be a doctor. You can also be an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is someone that elevates resources from an area of low yield to an area of high yield. Basically, you invent things, and you create value in the world. You come up with ideas, and you make them happen. So I fell in love with doing this. And the first way I did this is I had a friend who fell on my longboard, and so I built a little brake so he could use it, and my other friends could use it. And then I built this little workout supplement that helped you build muscles faster. And then I built a bunch of apps and websites. But here's the problem. If you want to get into computer science and you're dyslexic, it's kind of difficult. Because computer science is based on writing little variables. And so if you write a variable here, and then you write it completely differently here because you misspelled it, the program won't run. And so I knew that computer science was interesting and would allow me to build things faster, even in high school. And so I always tried to learn computer science, but it never worked. Because I would always misspell everything. But a couple of months into college, actually my second year of college, I realized, okay, I have to learn how to do computer science. In the same way that I had to learn how to read. Because though I read slowly, I still can't read. So I enrolled in the intro computer science class at Brown. And every day what I would do is I would go make 8 peanut butter sandwiches. I would walk into the computer science lab at 8 in the morning, and I would spend all day there. And I'd walk back home at midnight. And I did this for the first 3 months of the class. And while normal people took about 3 hours to finish a homework assignment, it would take me 15 hours. But about 3 months in, I started to be able to tell the difference between a bug in my software that was due to spelling mistakes and a bug that was due to an actual mistake. And then I started to get good at computer science. And then I found a series of videos on YouTube that taught me how to make iPhone apps and how to make websites. And I realized that the way that's best for me to learn is not by reading documentation online, it's by watching a video of somebody else do it, and then I did it, and then I watched another video and did that. So I built clones of Instagram and Snapchat and Uber and all these different apps. And then I started to be able to build my own. And so that was extremely liberating. And so I started building this app. And then I thought, and then I graduated from university. And when you graduate, you need to take a job. So I was considering, okay, maybe I'd go work at Google, or I'd go work at Facebook, or I'd go work at a bank somewhere. But I was like, no, I want to work on my own things, because that's what makes me excited. But I was not sure what I wanted to work on full time. I had about 3 projects at the time that were doing quite well, but I decided that none of them created enough value in the world. So I took a deep breath, I stepped back, and I decided to stay at Brown and be a teacher. So I taught at Brown for about a year. And during that time, I read a piece of paper that changed my life. It was this academic research about the application of artificial intelligence to text-to-speech, where for the first time you could do text-to-speech at the quality of human speech. It's this special algorithm called deep learning, which is a subcategory of neural nets that mimic the way of how the human brain works to do pattern recognition. And so I took that algorithm and I put that into this little hack that I built for myself to read stuff. And it worked really well. And I thought, wow, this can help other kids with dyslexia. But where are there other kids with dyslexia? Well, I went online and Googled, and I looked for the best dyslexia school in the world. And it turns out that one of those schools is the Hamilton School that's inside of Wheeler. And so I found the email address of Hamilton, and I emailed the principal. And so I met with Mr. Green, and we talked for about 2 hours. And he told me, this is pretty cool. Well, thanks for coming out. I have to go. I'm giving this speech at a conference in Florida tomorrow in front of 1,000 dyslexia educators. And I was like, okay, Mr. Green, I'll see you there. Sounds like exactly the place that I should be. And so he walked off thinking, yeah, right, he's going to show up in Florida tomorrow. So at 2 in the morning, I booked a ticket to Florida. And if you know anything about flights, you'll know that it's really expensive to book a flight last minute. So what I did is I called United, and I booked a ticket for like 3 months away. And then I called them, I was like, hey, can you please do me a favor? I need to adjust the date to tomorrow. And they were like, no, we can't do that. And I was like, please, can you do that? And they're like, no, we can't do that. And I was like, no, please, can you do that? And finally, they agreed. And so one great thing about being dyslexic is you spend your entire childhood trying to convince parents and teachers and adults to give you special exceptions for things because you can't do your homework on time. And so I got really good at convincing strangers to do the things that I needed them to do. And so on the phone, I convinced United to give me a 70% discount on my flight. So I showed up, but I didn't have a ticket to this conference, and I didn't have a place to stay, and so I booked a little Airbnb next to the fancy hotel that everything was happening in. And I would take Ubers there, and I walked into the lobby, and John Green was like, what are you doing here? And I was like, I came to tell people about Speechify. And he was like, okay. And I was like, hey, can you do me a favor? I don't have a ticket. Do you mind if I borrow yours? And he was like, okay. So I walked around the International Dyslexia Association conference, and people would be like, hi, my name is Greg. What's your name? John Green? Yes, I'm John Green. Nice to meet you. Principal of the Hamilton School. And what I would do is people were like, wow, John Green. And so someone would give a presentation in front of like 1,000 people, and then they'd walk off the stage. And then I'd kind of like hide behind the stage, and I'd be like, hi, not John Green, I'm Cliff Weitzman. I'm the CEO of this company called Speechify. We help kids with dyslexia read. Here's what Speechify does. You see, I can go online and I can highlight a piece of text, and I click a keyboard shortcut, and it'll read it to me. And then I can make the text go from 200 words per minute to 700 words per minute. So you can start reading really fast. And I can scan all these books, and it'll read it to me. And at the end of that conference, 15 schools offered to fly me out to teach their kids how to use speechify. And then I started working with Hamilton Moore. And actually, speechify got started in Martha's 8th grade class here. And I tested all with Hamilton kids. And then I tested it with a bunch of other schools. So now, speechify used by hundreds of thousands of people all across the world. And I ended up on Forbes 30 under 30 for it, and then I flew out to San Francisco, and now we have 16 engineers who work full-time on speechify. And some of them used to work at Apple and Snapchat and Uber and all these other places. And all we do full-time is work on making sure that reading is never a barrier to learning for anybody. And so for me, the thing... So there's a really important principle that I follow in my life, which is the most important thing above all else, is to make sure that you are the person who you needed most when you were young. And so like I said in the beginning, every week about 1,500 books equivalent to the size of Harry Potter are read to people using speechify. My mom actually is British, so she has a British accent. So speechify has a voice called the Stephanie voice. And it's like every day my mom gets to sit and read Harry Potter to hundreds of thousands of kids around the world. And that happened because I had a problem with dyslexia. And now I was able to solve it. But here's the really crazy thing, okay? So the average reading speed in the United States is 200 words per minute. The average college professor reads at about 450, 500 words per minute. So when I started listening, I listened at about 200 words per minute. Now let me ask you guys a question. Who here has ever listened to a podcast or an audiobook? Raise your hand. Okay, that's literally the entire audience. Cool. Has anybody listened at above 1x speed? Okay, that's like half the audience. Cool. So you guys get where I'm going with this. So when I started listening to audiobooks, I listened at 1x speed. And then I started listening at 1.25x speed, and then 1.5x speed, and then 1.75, and then 2x, and then 2.5, and then 3x. And here's the thing people don't realize. It's really easy to coach yourself to listen faster. Way easier than it is to learn how to read faster. Because humans have been around for like 2,000 years. And only a couple of hundreds of those years we've been reading. Most of it we've been listening. So when I use speechify, I listened at 600 words per minute. That's 3 times faster than the average reading speed. Here's the other crazy thing. So I used to read less than that. I used to read at like 150, 180 words per minute. But today, I read at about 250 words per minute, so faster than the average reader. And here's why. When you're dyslexic, there's a portion of your brain that's not good at doing what's called decoding. It's breaking down the sounds in a word. And that's why people with dyslexia often don't read a lot, because it's really hard to decode. And in order to become a fast reader, you have to be exposed to a lot of words so you can start recognizing them on sight. So for example, when I'm walking around, I never know the names of the street because it takes me so much energy to decode that that street sign says Thayer. But when I'm walking with my sister, she always knows the names of the streets because she just sees a word and boom, she knows what the answer is. It's in her brain. If I saw a picture of a dog, I'd know it's a dog, but if it says Thayer, I don't know it's Thayer. But what happened is I spent the past 5 years using speechify to text-to-speech on my computer and on my phone. And speechify highlights the word as it's reading to you. And I get to use 2 senses when I'm reading, so I have way better comprehension because I'm both seeing and listening. But at the same time, the computer is doing the decoding for me. So I became a really good reader because I had that experience of seeing a word and listening to it at the same time. So I wanted to quickly talk a little bit about dyslexia and what dyslexia is, and then I'll open it up to questions. So fundamentally what dyslexia is, it's a way in which your brain functions a little bit differently than most people's. There's the left side and the right side of the brain. In a normal person's brain, that area is pretty straightforward, and it's very fast to move information from one side to the other. If you're dyslexic, that connection is a little bit different. And therefore, it ends up having impacts. So reading takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of time. People sometimes think that dyslexia is a situation where you kind of like flip the words or the words kind of like let it jumble around. That's not exactly it. It's more so of an energy thing. You end up spelling very phonetically. So spelling is really difficult. Sometimes we mix up our left and our rights. Sometimes it's hard to remember specific dates, or it's hard to remember names. At the same time, when you're dyslexic, you have a ton of unbelievable advantages that you get. People with dyslexia are really good at storytelling. and understanding the bigger picture. A lot of really famous politicians are dyslexic. For example, George Washington was dyslexic. The current governor of California, Gavin Newsom, is dyslexic. People with dyslexia are good at telling stories, so a lot of actors are dyslexic and improvising. So Tom Cruise, Channing Tatum, Keira Knightley, all dyslexic. And people with dyslexia are really good at kind of like 3D visualization. That's why it was easy for me to build Board Break, the skateboard break. And so Da Vinci was dyslexic. And dyslexia is sometimes called the MIT syndrome or the NASA syndrome because so many designers, engineers, and astrophysicists have dyslexia. So for me, I started out as a 10-year-old in the back of the class, just trying to cope. And then I went through high school, and I had all this experience where I had to struggle really, really hard to be able to keep up. And what happened is you struggle so hard that you end up with kind of like a heart of steel that gets developed. And you develop the superhero ability to persevere through any situation and self-advocate for yourself and speak to everybody to make sure that they understand what you need and how you need it. And you develop this ability to solve problems. So here's one crazy statistic. 5% of students in the public school system are diagnosed with dyslexia. About 17 or 20% of people actually have dyslexia, but most of them are not diagnosed. However, 30% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic, and 40% of wildly successful entrepreneurs, like Charles Schwab, Richard Branson, have dyslexia. And it's because it's this thing that when you're very, very little, it forces you to become really, really good at coming up with ideas, speaking for yourself, and persevering. And so that's what happened to me. And then I was really lucky because I got to find this one idea that was so important to me personally. And it was the thing that I wanted to give everybody else. It was the thing that was most important to me that I really needed when I was young. And I got to develop that. And now I'm very fortunate to be here and to get to talk to a lot of different schools around the world, sharing my story with you and making sure that you know about Speechify so that you can use it. And so you can have this superpower to make sure that reading is never a barrier to learning ever. And it doesn't matter if you have dyslexia or ADD or a concussion, or you're a second language learner, or even if you're a normal person, because right now, about 60% of people who use Speechify don't even have a learning difference. They're normal people who just want to listen to their books in the car or their emails as they're walking around. So thank you for having me, and check out Speechify.